welcome back to another episode of the Employer Exchange podcast. Our goal is to help business owners improve their workplaces by sharing personal stories and discussing relevant legal issues. Our guest today is Brian Williams with Northshire Consulting, located in Southington, Connecticut. Be sure to listen until the end to hear how Brian would survive being on a deserted island all by himself. Brian, how are you?
I'm doing all right. Yeah. Now I know what the question is. Now it's in my head. Now I'm gonna be thinking about it.
We did a live recording here in our Berlin office at Monarch Law. We were unable to get the audio correct. Thank you for making time in your schedule. I know you're away with family and you're fitting us in, so we appreciate that.
Happy to be here again. Second time,
Good.
long time.
So tell us about Northshire and how you started this business.
We are based in Southington, but really Southington, Connecticut, and of course have clients all over now, doing this type of format as well as in-person meetings. And I think it's part of independent advisors coming on board, and I'm part of that wave, I guess, sort of thing. So we have, my business is focused on a couple different segments, which is working with individuals on their wealth management or helping them accumulate wealth. And then about 60% of what I do is workplace retirement accounts. So that's 401ks or 403bs for nonprofits or simple IRA SEP, something like that. So even though I think portions of the business, they really do kind of run together. So a lot of the stuff that we work with, passion is using that workplace retirement account as a foray into, helping people get help that's kind of eluded them for the average consumer for a long time.
Yeah. And how long have you had Northshire Consulting as your business?
About 5 years now. So got approved by the state in late December of 2018. So I guess kind of coming on board, getting up and running early 2019. And, you just get up and running, and then you got to deal with a pandemic and all that kind of stuff. So it's fun. Some stories to tell the kids.
It sounds like you're working with individuals, but also maybe small business owners or just business owners in general. Is that fair to say?
I'd say the typical business owner, a lot of times, it's so funny how often I hear the question, oh, well, we're probably too small to work with us, or you're too small, or we're too small to have a 401k. But it's really not the case anymore. And in fact, Connecticut and a number of other states, you're now mandated to have a retirement plan if you have 5 or more employees. So,
right.
The local bakery who's like, oh, I got to start a retirement plan. What do I do? It's hard to find an advisor. Nobody's going to work with us. We're so small. But I will happily work in exchange for donuts or whatever. So I will take that piece of business all day long. But so I think that's to just be super efficient, do a lot of our stuff, in group settings. So, it might not be great use of time to go out and sit with every single client and do, quarterly meetings with 5 or so employees. But if you could do some online, virtual meetings, because 90% of what 401ks are the same across all businesses. So you can have some, educational sessions and intro to investing and stuff like that, and invite all your employees to those things. So the idea is just to really take those big company benefits that you think of, having United Technology or whatever, and then just bring those into, the small company and get those up and running. On the individual side, same sort of thing. I mean, you think about people who are at retirement, they have that pool of money, and we think about how hard it is to save for retirement. But the harder part, I actually think, is spending in retirement, because now it's like, oh my goodness, I got this pool of money. How do I make it last until I'm 100? Because you really do have to plan for that now. And when you do the math, you realize people are spending almost as much time in retirement as they did working. You might work for 40 years and be retired for 40 years. So that's certainly a long time to work without any job, or a long time to live without any job. And then we get a lot of people just kind of starting out. So we do some group classes with, people right out of school, and do some kind of like subscription based, so it helps people, well, for the cost of your Netflix and your Disney Plus, you could have a financial advisor and work through some software and got to get your budgeting and all that stuff going. So,
So you have this consulting business. You're located in Southington, Connecticut. You're working with individuals. You're working with the employers, helping them set up these retirement plans. And as you said earlier, in Connecticut now it is a requirement, and it's something that we've had to do here at Monarch Law. We do have employer clients who we consult with, and when they start asking us questions about 401ks and retirements. We just kind of point them to the law and tell them to go talk to a financial advisor like you. For the employer folks out there that are wondering, oh, I don't have a 401k. What are these guys talking about? What would you say to those folks that are just really kind of wondering about this requirement to have a 401k?
Bring up a lot of different groups of businesses there. I think the first one is if you already have a plan. The good news is you just kind of need to register that with the state. So you get that email link and you just have to say, yes, I have a plan. So those people are all set. For
So
employers
they're set. Let me ask you a question on that. Is that the My CT Savings? Is that the website that they would go to for Connecticut employers to register?
It is.
Or
Yep.
okay,
So
so
they get an email with a
savings.
link, and then there's a code that they have to put in, and then they kind of have to self-certify that. Eventually, I think they'll get to the point where every 401k plan needs to file that tax form every year, that form 5500, and those are registered with the IRS, and they're actually even public too. But I think
Okay.
eventually they're going to reconcile those. So as long as you're doing your 5500, that will also serve as your certification with the state. So I think that's good there.
Okay.
So if you have a plan, then likely everything's good. Now the quality of that plan and whether it needs to be changed is a different conversation, but at least you're okay with the state. If you don't have a
Okay.
plan, I like to put a positive spin on it. So I don't, we're business owners. Nobody likes mandates. Nobody likes to be told what to do. Whether it's business owners or my 6-year-old son, nobody likes to be told what to do. So we hear that word mandate and everybody kind of moans and groans, but the reality is it's not that difficult to set up a retirement plan. It's not that expensive. There's a ton of tax credits and everything that can help you. So, and a lot of times there's no cost to the employer in terms of dollars. And it helps you remain competitive. I mean, if all your other competition, it's hard to find good employees. And I don't think anybody's going to take a job they don't want or stay at a bad job because the 401k is good. I'm not going to go to that extreme. But if you're in competition for employees, the fact that you have a good retirement plan signifies that you at least care about your employees, and it might be that trigger that's like, okay, well, these people are doing the right thing. These might be a good, this job might be a good home for me. Whereas if you just kind of, if you don't have a plan or if you just kind of lazily sign up for the state program, it's like, yeah, that if this employer wasn't willing to put in a little bit of time and effort to put together a good retirement plan, what else is this employer not going to do for me or with me as an employee? So I think it's a good chance to kind of, even if you have an existing plan, kind of review that to make sure you're staying competitive in the market. And if you're starting a new plan, really just make it as good as it can be. There's no reason to just kind of half-ass it.
Right.
Because you might lose employees over it. So it's not that difficult.
Right. That's a really good point about attracting talent as an employer, the employers that we consult with. And that can be everywhere from onboarding to offboarding and everything in between. And a lot of times we get, especially in the more recent time, complaints about, it's hard to find people, to hire people that they want to retain, and having a 401k prior to this mandate was a huge attractive way to do that. Now it's a requirement. You said 5 employees or more. And is there any potential for that being reduced in the future? Are you aware of anything like that?
So there's about 17 states that have programs now. Connecticut is probably in like the top, third of them as far as how long they've been in existence. California is down to your first employee. Once you hire somebody, you have to have a retirement plan. So a lot of these states kind of follow each other in terms of the setup. So I wouldn't be surprised if Connecticut starts to kind of slow that down, whittle it down a little bit. They originally started with 100 or more employees, and then went down to 50, and then 25, and then they went down to the small businesses. But if you've got 2 or 3 employees, why wait for the mandate? Why wait till you're told? Poke around now and see if you can get something up and running. Chances are if you've got 1 or 2 employees, the majority of the money is going to be saved by the business owner anyway. They're going to put the money away. So you're doing something for your employees, but you're also doing something for yourself too. You want to have a top-notch retirement program for yourself. So I think it's important for all business owners to kind of poke around and see what's available.
Okay. Well, let's say someone doesn't, and they say, I don't care. I'm not doing it. What have you run into that? And if so, what are the repercussions?
It's a mandate, but there's no fine yet. They tried to pass something with this legislative session. It didn't go through. So basically, the way they have it structured now is the employees would have to sue the business owner for being non-compliant. So it's just kind of set up as
Hmm.
I guess, kind of a civil thing where you'd have to. I mean, it's unlikely that that's going to happen. So I think they kind of know that. In the other states that do have penalties, they're pretty severe. So it's like $250 per each employee that you don't have for every, I don't know what, for every year or something that you haven't had it in place. So the
Wow.
penalties are far greater than the cost to actually get it up and running. So it's not something you really want to mess around with because you don't know if it's like going to end up becoming retroactive or something like that. So they may end up passing some penalty next year that says if you haven't had it since we required you, here's the new penalty. So it's not really
Yeah.
something you want to mess around with, I don't think.
It doesn't.
Um,
So let's say we hire somebody down the road to do the 401k, and after a year or two, everyone's losing their money and employers are mad. They say these guys don't know what they're doing. They invested our money in this crappy fund. Am I in trouble? Is the firm down the street in trouble? Have you any input into that?
Last few years, there's been a ton of ERISA-based legal action and lawsuits, and obviously most of those are going to be directed at the bigger companies because that's where the payouts are. It doesn't make sense for the attorney to bring a class action with a five or six employees. So that's that. But I think what's good about those, and I like to follow those, is because you see what's happening at the big plan level and the mistakes they made. And it's like, even though the small plan isn't likely to be sued, we're still learning what the best practices are, and let's make sure those things are happening here. So it's kind of that North Star, that guiding light. And sometimes,
Yeah.
for me, being in the business, I see some of these plans, and it's like a multi-million, Fortune 500 company. You're like, really? They did that with their 401k plan? They did this, they did that. So it's pretty crazy when that kind of stuff comes out. But um, I would say even for small employers, just have a prudent process for selecting all of your components. So you'll have an advisor that kind of leads the process. You're going to have a record keeper. That's where you submit your payroll contributions. That's where you get your statements. That's where your employees log on. That record keeper might also be the administrator who keeps track of vesting and who's eligible, or that might be a third party administrator. And then you have your investment options. Those are all the different mutual funds type products that are available inside of your plan. So typically the advisor consultant will kind of put that dream team together based on a number of different factors, size of your business and all that kind of stuff. So you want to just make sure that consultant is independent. You want to make sure they can use any mutual fund family, any record keeper, any TPA. If they're too close in that relationship, then you've kind of blown up your whole fiduciary aspect of doing what's right for the client. If this advisor is getting, you know, some sort of deal with the record keepers or some sort of, something that's not on the up and up, that's not probably the best way to go. So you just want to make sure that you have a prudent process for selecting the advisor and then making sure that they're following a process and that they're as independent as possible. As far as the
Yeah.
performance, I mean, listen, the market can go down. I mean, we all have kind of lived through periods of that, and that's not necessarily the advisor or the investment's fault, but you do want to make sure that your employees understand that the risk that they're taking, which is hard. I mean, you got somebody who's 40 years old now, basically their whole working career, they've almost never really had any sort of down market. So, you know, '08 was probably the worst, semi recently, and that was
Yeah.
16 years ago. So people are kind of locked into the fact that the market almost always goes up. So when we do have another '08, and it will happen again, you know, are they prepared for that? Are they, if you're young, you'll recover from that. And, 2009 and 10 were all really good years. So, but you do want to have those conversations to let them know that that could happen again. Not just could, but likely will happen again. And just
Yeah.
be prepared for
That's a
that.
good point. Issues that you've been following, or maybe even the lawsuits that you've been following in the past, have any of those involved the employer as a defendant in that class action?
It's always, yeah,
Yeah.
they
Okay.
almost always go after the employer.
So the
And that's usually
employer, and
because,
then
yeah, that's where the money is. And, usually they get settled and admit no wrongdoing, and somebody writes a check,
yeah,
and the attorneys keep all the fees, and the participants get a few pennies So usually that's the way they kind of work out. But yeah, I mean, usually
Those
they're
damn
not.
attorneys,
I know they're the worst,
right?
but yeah, I mean that's usually how they've shook out so far. They don't typically
Okay.
go after the advisor, the record keeper, because you know fiduciary responsibility is you can do things to as the employer to kind of outsource as much as possible. But it's like even if you hire somebody to handle all the fiduciary responsibility, you still as the employer had the responsibility to hire the person that so it's like you can never
Ultimately.
completely remove yourself from that circle, so you're always going to be at the top of the pyramid there.
Okay. Have you heard of any kind of horror stories, either from other advisors or just from your own firsthand knowledge of working with
Yeah,
clients,
there's
where some bad stuff has happened? What can you share
yeah
with our audience?
yeah there's been some bad ones. I'll share a positive first. We'll start there, but it's
Okay.
funny. I
Yeah.
some of the small business plans, I have this client who was one of those that was like, oh, we're too small, we probably won't even take us, or we probably shouldn't even have a 401k. But we did it. We set it up. 5 employees are all participating. And when she goes to hire, she has a little bit of turnover. It's kind of a retail shop. She's like, oh, it's so cool. Whenever I go on Indeed, I get to check the box and I have a 401k. It's kind of like I have a grown-up company now, Like, yeah, that is pretty cool. It's something
That
that,
is cool.
as advisor, I don't really think about, but she's like, yeah, that's cool. Like I have a big boy company. But yeah, I mean, we've had some issues where like we were working through a plan. Good employer really does care about their employees. But they had some front office staff who was primarily English speaking, and then some back office staff who English wasn't their first language. And what they found out over time is the advisor had no Spanish speaking capabilities and basically wasn't serving the entire employee population equally. And what ended up happening is these people had money go into an account. It was a simple IRA plan, and the money never really got invested. It basically just sat in the account earning a small amount of interest for literally over a decade. So
Oh,
that's
wow.
one where, they brought me in as a consultant to help, so I'm looking at different programs and Spanish language capabilities and who can I bring in for an interpreter and different videos and all sorts of different things to kind of convert this and clean it up. So, that's one where, good employer, I mean, not wasn't trying to do the wrong thing, but just kind of, business owners are focused on other things. They're not spending hours thinking about the 401k plan. So that's one that kind of went off the rails a little bit, but they were smart enough to recognize it and take corrective action. We've seen some.
And it sounds like some of the folks at that employer were getting um, put into a better retirement plan. He called it a simple IRA.
Yeah. Yeah.
Was that just like not as good as what the other employees had?
Company had a simple IRA structure. And this was set up a long time ago. So simple IRAs came out, it was at a time when 401ks were a lot more expensive, a lot more complex. So they kind of set up this the IRS set up these simple IRAs that were kind of like a 401k, but had a lot of features of an IRA where they were a little bit more employee owned and directed. So basically the money would go into these accounts and it was up to the employees to log on and make the purchases of their own funds, whatever investments they chose. So if they weren't educated and prompted to do that, it never happened. So
I
a lot of
see.
those employees just kind of missed out on that opportunity.
Oh, wow.
So
Okay.
yeah. So it's not really
Yeah,
any wrongdoing from the employer because ultimately it is technically the employee's responsibility in that setup to go on and buy the whatever mutual funds they want. But it wasn't a connection there from an education and communication standpoint.
right. Well, and as a lawyer looking at it, I could see some potential liability on the employer. Did the employer have a duty to follow up with those employees, especially knowing that English wasn't their first language, and prompting them to do it this way, or have somebody come in who did speak Spanish and explain it to them, instead of just letting it go and sit there? And I would assume over the years, the employer may have gotten some reports on the accounts and saw these people have money that are growing, and then this section of the employee population, their money wasn't doing anything. So
Right.
I could see some issues there, but that's really great information. I don't want to keep you too long because I know you're on vacation, and so I'm going to ask you two things. The first is, I know you're a big baseball card collector. What is your most treasured possession? in the
Ooh,
collectible arena?
yeah, that's a good question. I think it would probably go back to some of the original stuff that the best ones are the ones that are worth nothing. The stuff you bought when you were 7 or 8 years old and it's all creased and bent and all that kind
Yeah.
of stuff. So I still have some of those. So it's funny, some of those that kind of got beat up over the last 30 years, I still have those. But then I wanted like a cleaner, nicer copy of like that same, that like 1987 Bo Jackson tops or whatever. So there's a grading company different, and they certify how nice the
Yep.
card is. So 10 is usually the best. So a few of those I went out and got the 10 version of those. So I would
Okay.
say it's a combination of those. Ultimately, it goes back to the fun stuff you had when you were a kid and then getting the
Yeah.
upgraded, like newer stuff. There's a few of those that like the 89 Ken Griffey Jr. that like I wanted when I was 10 years old or whatever that didn't get. So now it's like, oh, I can go back and get those now. That's pretty cool. So I have a few cases in my office at home. So when I do my Zoom meetings, they pop up behind me sometimes. So people will ask about those. But yeah, those are fun.
Awesome. My second question is, you are going to a deserted island. You know you're going there, and I'm telling you that you can only bring one item with you. It's a deserted
Okay.
island. You're going to be there for 1 week, and there is wildlife there. So what are you bringing with you, Brian?
Wildlife when I get there, the wildest and craziest of them all. Well, I mean, the obvious answer is cell phone, but that's probably not allowed to do that. But I guess the boring answer, if this is an island in the middle of the ocean, would be some kind of mechanism to get good clean water. So it's maybe one of those something that can kind of desalinize the water and make that a little bit more drinkable. Because without water, you kind of got nothing else. Um,
Right.
I guess that's
All right.
probably it.
All right. Air filtration system for
Yeah.
Mr. Brian Williams going to a deserted island. We like to try to make things fun on the podcast as well as in the office here with our team at Monarch Law. So, Brian, why don't you tell everyone where they could find you, website, email, phone number, things like that?
If you're somebody who's active in LinkedIn, you can find me there. So try to post some stuff every once in a while. The easiest thing is to just go to northshireconsulting.com. Right on my menu, there's a schedule link to my calendar. So, existing clients, potential clients, or just somebody who wants to have a conversation can always, book 15 minutes and we'll see where we're a good fit. If we're not a good fit, we can, we know a lot of good people. We could point you in the right direction, but just try to add value to as many people as possible, whether you're a client or not, and see if we can help.
All right. I heard you also have started a podcast. What's the name of your podcast and where can
Yeah,
people
so
find it?
we have a 401k and beyond podcast where we're not on a regular schedule, but we do when we come across somebody who's pretty interesting and have a conversation about something in the industry, we can just kind of do kind of a long form thing. Because I came about because I was doing a lot of conversations with people, and you get like 10 minutes in, you're like, man, we should have recorded this. We should just put this out there. Even if one or two people listen, at least it's something we would have done anyway. So why not get it out there? So. Um, yeah, so
Good.
that's out there as well.
And it's Spotify. Where can we get it?
Yeah, yeah, all the platforms, 401k and beyond. Our
Good.
most recent interview was with the guy from the Employee Benefits Research Institute, and they put out a lot of good content about small businesses and different surveys and
Great.
stuff. So it's kind of interesting to look at that stuff.
All right, great. Thanks again for doing this a second time.
No
And
problem.
as always, we like to end these episodes with a tip of the cap. You can do it any way you want it. Everyone has a different way they tip their cap, but that's how we close out these episodes. So thank you, everyone, for listening. If you like this episode, please share it. Spread the word about 401k and retirement plans. Check us out on Spotify and YouTube. Until next time, 3, 2, 1.